So, I'm about to take you through 12 major behavioral patterns you'll see if you are the child of a narcissist. Now, I want to be clear. You may have varying degrees of this based on if you just grew up with a parent or parents who had narcissistic qualities, but were in close proximity to a lot of this. And you will also absolutely see a lot of these patterns if you were in a long term relationship with a narcissist, a live-in relationship, especially a marriage, or even if you had a sibling who was a narcissist in the home that you were really close to in age or spent a lot of time around. So essentially, these are some big behavioral qualities you will see in varying degrees if you grow up with a narcissistic figure. And you may see variations of this if you grew up in a household where there was obviously somebody with antisocial personality disorder or borderline personality disorder. And last but not least, you may also see little patterns of this if you grew up in a home with a lot of chaos, fearful avoidant attachment styles as parents, with lots of ups and downs, a roller coaster of patterns or behaviors, or if you were exposed to any other repetitive and consistent trauma that will deeply program the subconscious mind. So let's really look at the focus and we'll look at the lens through children of narcissists and ex of narcissists. So, first and foremost, it can be terrifying for you coming out of that relationship or as an adult coming out of a home with a narcissist or narcissistic parents, to take up space. It can be scary for you to talk about your own feelings, your own needs, feel like you're worthy of really setting your own boundaries, or for people to really deeply see you and cater to what you need. And in fact, so much of how you are programmed and conditioned made to be consistently of service to everybody else in your life at all times. Because if you grew up in a home where this was modeled to you, or if there wasn't room for you and your feelings and your needs to exist, then you may feel like, okay, I'm conditioned to not take up space. It's never been about me. I don't even know how to make it about me. So, this is a huge common quality we'll see first. Second, there may be this dynamic of constantly looking for how you can be of value, of worth, to someone rather than developing a sense of self. So you'll see this really, sometimes disoriented sense of self, where rather than thinking, hey, what do I want to do in the world? What do I want to create? What matters to me? How do I want to show up? Instead, it's like you're constantly trying to fit yourself into being something for other people. And again, this comes from a lot of repetition and emotion, a lot of conditioning where there may not have been room for you to take up space. Or if you were in a long term relationship with a narcissist, your identity gets very much stripped. You may find coming out of that relationship, one of the scariest parts is having this identity crisis, right? Of not knowing who you are because you didn't get room to think about who you are and what you wanted for the entirety of that relationship. And of course, if you're a child coming out of a narcissistic home, then you'll probably find that you don't really know who you are, what your needs are, what your values are, because again, there's so much forced external focus, right? If you're in a home with a narcissist, it's always about them. And so this idea of thinking about yourself or finding yourself can be something that feels very confusing and disorienting and definitely not a part of your subconscious comfort zone. Number three, you will generally see that children of narcissistic homes or people coming out of a narcissistic relationship are extreme codependents. They tend to have a very strong and over exaggerated sense of responsibility for other people's feelings. And they will feel so much more for other people than they will for their own feelings and emotions. And in fact, due to the enmeshment of those emotions, it can be hard to actually identify which feelings are, your feelings about how somebody else feels versus your own feelings in a situation. And this can cause people to have a really difficult time really listening to their gut, trusting their intuition, feeling like they know what's right for them versus wrong for them, really individuating and developing that sense of self that allows you to say, you know what, that might be right for you, but not for me. And so because you're so engulfed and enmeshed with other people's emotions, and then feel this deep sense of care to be there for other people's emotions and the way that they feel, this can be a huge component of causing you to get out of relationship to self-trust, to your gut, to your own inner feelings and your own inner world. And that can have a lot of different sort of repercussions long term, right? You might be more likely, if you came out of a home like this, for example, to then end up in a relationship with somebody who's a narcissist, because that's your comfort zone. And you'll find oftentimes, alarm bells won't go off in the same way. So it's an important thing to pay attention to. Number 4, often we'll see children of narcissists and adults coming out of narcissistic relationships become terrified of making mistakes. They can be highly perfectionistic, and it's because you got conditioned to feel like if you made the smallest of errors in what you said, how you showed up, what you did, if you forgot something, there were often more extreme punishments involved. And so you get really deeply conditioned to be really afraid of making any kind of mistake and having those mistakes really paid for, right? So you get like, if you think of like the Pavlov's dogs experiment, you get this, really magnified version of that essentially in the way that you are conditioned. The next one is you'll tend to see very strong fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses. So you'll see a lot of people pleasing. Children of narcissistic homes, as well as exes of narcissists. You'll see a lot of this people pleasing dynamic. And then you'll also see extreme flight responses a lot of the time, like really fleeing the scene, avoiding things, running away, freeze responses, and even fight responses at times. So you're slightly less likely to see that. Um, and when you do see these dynamics, right, you'll see that these are our 4 trauma responses, right? Fight, flight, freeze, fawn are the 4 trauma responses, because there's a lot of complex trauma that happens in these really close-knit relationships where there's a lot of repetition and emotion, which is what conditions the subconscious mind largely to experience a lot of these really sort of confusing dynamics, and will create a lot of this deep programming around these strong fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses. This goes hand in hand with our next piece, which is nervous system dysregulation. You'll probably find that you spend way more time in sympathetic nervous system mode versus parasympathetic. Parasympathetic is our rest and digest mode. It's where we actually want to be spending the vast majority of our time. But if you go through a lot of constant trauma, walking on eggshells, being afraid, being confused about what's going to happen in your environment, then you're constantly upregulated. And that can actually create a lot more cortisol in your body. It can dysregulate your insulin sensitivity, and it can have a massive impact on your immune system overall if you're spending too much time in sympathetic. And also, when you're in sympathetic nervous system, not only do you have these magnified fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses, but you also will tend to be hyper focused on what could go wrong, what's the worst case scenario, waiting for the other shoe to drop. You'll have a lot of these different dynamics as a whole. Our next major piece is that you'll find that you have many core wounds. Generally, core wounds happen because we go through a traumatic experience that we can't properly emotionally process, so we give it meaning. And especially for children of narcissistic homes, you'll see that when we can't understand something, children personalize things instead. So if somebody's unloving, they're not like, oh, my parents being unloving. They're like, oh, I'm unlovable. Or if, they're being really criticized for something and it's too harsh of a criticism or punishment, they're not like, oh, this punishment is disproportionate to the experience. They're like, oh, I'm unworthy. I'm really bad. And so we give meaning to these things. And this happens in our adult lives as well. And it can imprint our subconscious mind just the same way as adults. But you'll see, there'll be even more of this as a general rule, and it'll be more deeply stored, especially if we grow up in a home like this. So you'll see, I am unworthy, I'm unloved, I'm not good enough, I'm unsafe, I'm trapped, I'll be betrayed. A lot of these different fears, sometimes fears around abandonment, definitely fears around being bad. So you'll see a lot of these different core wounds at play. And yes, you're probably hearing through some of this, if you're a big avid watcher of this channel, that there are a lot of pieces here that overlap with fearful avoidant attachment style. Generally, children of narcissistic homes can definitely be fearful avoidant in terms of attachment style. There will be other factors at play, like how many children are in the household, what order are you in the household as a child, how much time were you around this figure or figures before you left the home or before there was a divorce, or these different dynamics. But they're important to sort of keep in mind. And again, there can be lots of other factors that cause fearful avoidant attachment style. It's not saying that every fearful avoidant comes from a narcissistic home at all. There can be so many more factors at place, but there does tend to be a bit of a correlation here where it's like not all fearful avoidants come from a narcissistic home. But there is a stronger likelihood that if you come from a narcissistic home, you would be a fearful avoidant. The next big piece here is you may really deny your own needs and have no idea what they are. It goes back to that idea that we talked about first, where it's hard to take up space, right? You're not sure how to have needs. And again, if you're an adult coming out of a relationship like this, it's like you're forced to be so focused on the narcissist needs that it's impossible to really see like what you need, to tune into your own needs, to make them a priority, to feel like it's safe to communicate them to others, or that you're worthy of having needs communicated to others and then met by others. So you'll see a lot of these different dynamics at play. Now, we still have a few more to go into here, but if you want to do a deep dive into healing from this, usually there's a good bit of complex trauma to heal from, and also complex grief. And if you want to do a deep dive and really work through the roots of healing from any form of narcissistic abuse, and if you want to check it out for free for 14 days, our 14-day free trial for Mental Health Month is just about to wrap up. So your last chance to get access to it is before June 1st. So you can use the link below, check it out for 14 days for free, and I can't wait to see you on the other side. The next big piece you'll see here is very strong emotions. You'll probably find that those strong emotions are the result of strong triggers. You'll also see a lot of all or nothing thought patterns, which can cause stronger emotions and triggers. So, because you're exposed to more extreme polarities of experiences, right? Like the love bombing side, especially if you're in a long term relationship with a narcissist, like the love bombing side, the super, super good, and then the devaluation side, the super, super bad. Well, this creates these polarities and these extremes on either end of the continuum. And so that will actually condition you to see things through an all or nothing lens. And just some really common examples I've seen here over time is like, coming out of a narcissistic home or ex relationship, you may see things like, oh, the person lied once, they are a liar altogether. I can never trust them at all again. And it's not saying don't address that somebody's lying, right? Maybe somebody, we have to address those things. It could be a huge red flag. If somebody lied about something big enough, it could absolutely be a non-negotiable. But if it was like a white lie, or they lied to avoid a conflict, or these little things, we can see those really magnified responses, all or nothing, right? Another big one that I'll see is things like, okay, um, because I started my day and ate the wrong food when I'm supposed to be eating clean first thing in the morning, maybe you were late to work, there's no food to eat, so you grabbed a muffin at work, or somebody brought in donuts, you ate a donut. Instead of being like, okay, I'm going to go back to clean eating, it's like this all or nothing dynamic. It's like, oh, I ate a donut, so I'm just going to eat junk food all day now. Who cares? Right? So it's like this inability to plug into the gray area. And again, research shows that there's a massive correlation, if not causation, between all or nothing thought patterns as forms of cognitive distortion, and those things actually being related to trauma, being exposed to really strong polarities of things, especially with a lot of repetition. So, like, the more you saw polarities, the more these all or nothing thought patterns are getting programmed into you and your inner world and experience. The next big piece here is struggling with extreme guilt and shame. If you often get guilted and shamed in extreme forms and quite repetitively, whether it's direct or indirect, you will often really struggle with excessive guilt and shame. And these two things in and of themselves will be massive barriers to getting ahead in life. Because if you believe that you are guilty, you are bad, and you are unworthy, and undeserving, and all these things that guilt and shame will have you feel about yourself, your subconscious mind is really working to maintain this comfort zone. So if you think you're not deserving of good things, you're not worthy of good things, you're a bad person, and you're always seeing the bad in yourself, your subconscious will block you from having your dreams, your desires, from living out what it is that you want to create for yourself, because you will literally your subconscious mind is trying to maintain its comfort zone. It doesn't want to go outside of its comfort zone. So you will keep yourself stuck subconsciously that way. And then the two last things that are massive are huge boundary issues, right? Usually all or nothing boundaries will be a massive piece. Having no boundaries, no boundaries, no boundaries, then maybe extreme boundaries when you've had enough. Sometimes those boundaries can be communicated in extreme ways. And we may just see like absolutely no boundaries for prolonged periods of time as well. And poor communication. So again, all or nothing communication. Maybe not communicating at all on behalf of yourself, not really sharing what you need, feeling so terrified of being vulnerable to communicate your needs, because you might have associated your needs with rejection before, right? If you tried to communicate growing up, maybe those needs were not met. Maybe they were devalued or disrespected or shamed or criticized, or maybe you were made to feel like a burden. So, you'll see a lot of these different dynamics here. And of course, that follows suit in our romantic relationships. So I know this is probably a bit of a heavy video in terms of all these things to pay attention to and all these patterns that I see over and over and over again in individuals coming out of this type of home, or with this type of relationship history in the past. But I do want to say to you, like, it is 100% possible to heal from these things. And it actually doesn't take as long as you would think or imagine. Once you have the targeted pieces to really address the subconscious roots, it's just about reconditioning. You weren't born with these patterns, they got conditioned into you over time, and you can leverage those same key principles about subconscious reconditioning to reprogram and to heal. So I hope this makes sense for today. Let me know any other questions you have down in the comments below. And thank you so, so much for watching and for being here. If you're enjoying this channel, please like, share, and subscribe. And I look forward to seeing you in all of the future videos.